Now we're going to take a look at the oil embargo of 1973 to 1975, where oil prices doubled. The reason they doubled, and this is the regular supply and demand curve, okay? And for oil. Well, the thing is, with oil, it's a fairly inelastic good. That means that we don't change our consumption of oil all that much when the prices rise, okay? Or necessarily buy all that more when the prices go down. But so that is not quite the depiction we're looking for. That demand curve is more like that. It's steeper. So what happened is that OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, there's about 11 countries or so, they get together, and what they do is they form a cartel. And what a cartel is an organization that tries its best to act as if it were a monopoly. Okay, so they get together, they decide on production, decide how much they're going to do, and all that. And they decided to restrict the supply. They were all going to cut back on their supplies, how much they were producing. And so what that does is it shifts the supply curve to the left. We see quantity falling, but we see the price going up quite a bit. Okay? And when you've got an inelastic good, and that's something we talk about in microeconomics as elasticity, the revenues go up. And so by restricting output and sending the price higher, they actually make more money, more revenues that way. The trick with a cartel is to hold it together, because the incentive is to cheat. If you're a small country in OPEC and you want, you're thinking, well, everyone else is cutting back and I've got this nice high price to look at, we can sell our oil at, we'll cheat and we'll produce more and hopefully no one will look or notice. And so a lot of them are thinking the same thing, and these cartel arrangements fall apart. But for at least a couple of years, they were quite successful in elevating the price of oil, doubling it in that period of time. And that has a big impact on the overall macroeconomy because oil is such an important input into our economy. Okay, so we've got our macroeconomic model here, and we start out at equilibrium right there. Okay, so with oil prices doubling and it being such an important and powerful input, inflationary expectations change because it's higher and it's driving other prices higher. And so what happens there is the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts up. And what that did in the 70s is it put us here, where we had inflation and recession. Inflation and recession at the same time, or inflation and stagnation. We call that stagflation. A new word in economic. Stagflation. This wasn't supposed to happen in the Keynesian world. This was supposed to be impossible. John Maynard Keynes was all about aggregate demand. And aggregate demand was supposed to cause inflation if it was too high, or deflation if it was too low. But this stagflation, this recession and inflation at the same time, brought on by the oil embargo, well, that's exactly what happened. And that's a tough thing to fix right there. So here is exactly what happened during that period. we had unemployment. Unemployment went from 4.9% in 1973 to 8.5% in 75. And we see that here, moving GDP backwards. That means unemployment is going up. And inflation went over 10%. Okay, so high inflation, unemployment, recession. And our aggregate demand and supply model here does a pretty good job of showing that, demonstrating that. Now, there's a positive side to all this, because it can work the other way, which it did in 1986. Here we are, equilibrium price level, and GDP. Well, 1986, like I said earlier, these countries, they get together and they decide to cut back and raise the price. But then these agreements often fall apart because of cheating. Once they all cut back and accomplish this higher price, the incentive is to expand and take advantage of the higher price, and the price comes back down again. Well, in 1986, this all fell apart for them by big time, and oil prices actually fell by half. And this was because Iran and Iraq were fighting each other, and they're two countries in OPEC, and what they did to finance their war was they each increased production. Forget OPEC. They were in a war, and they increased their output of oil, and oil prices, like I say, fell by half, and that went the other direction. That shifted the short-run aggregate supply curve downward and actually helped create a mini boom there for a while. So, we just love it when those guys can't get along. So oil prices fell. It helped stimulate our economy, and we were above the long-term potential GDP, and we didn't mind at least that part of it at all. So this is a nice little, these examples I gave are just a nice little way of demonstrating the model and how it does have a lot of explanatory power. And over the we can use it to explain the Great Depression, and we can use it to explain World War II, the boom of World War II, the oil embargo, and the bust here when oil prices crashed because of increase in supply. Our little model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply does a pretty good job, and we'll be using that in class, obviously, for the rest of the term, to do just that, to demonstrate what's going on and today, and also government's attempts to manage aggregate demand, to try to fix the economy when it's out of whack. There are two attempts, I should say. They're not always successful. Government's attempts to manage the economy are mixed in results. Sometimes it works better than others, and if they're not careful, they can actually make things worse. But one way is to shift the aggregate demand curve through government spending and deliberately either increase or decrease. That's called fiscal policy, and the other is for the Federal Reserve Bank to increase or decrease interest rates in an attempt to shift the aggregate demand curve, and that's called monetary policy. So More about that in class. So that is it for today. Have yourselves a safe and happy and fun Thanksgiving, and don't overdo it too much. But, well, why not? Overdo it. So it's one day a year. Overdo it. Have a great time. And see you back in class next week. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.